Have you ever seen a grown man use a rope to support all of his weight? Maybe that man was washing windows on a really tall building, or maybe he was coming down off of a really tall cliff. Either way, it seems odd that such a small, skinny rope could actually be that strong. But it's true. Sometimes small, weak things are much stronger than they seem. Think of baby Jesus. He was God's own son and the Savior who God had promised. And when Jesus was born, he looked and acted like an ordinary baby, very small and weak. So how could he possibly save anyone? But things aren't always as they seem, are they? Sometimes small, weak-looking things are much stronger than they seem. And that was true of baby Jesus as well. When Jesus was 8 days old, Joseph and Mary took him to the temple of Jerusalem to dedicate him to God. Now, this was a common thing for God's people to do, is to take their firstborn son to the temple and dedicate them to God. And sitting and waiting at the temple on the very same day was a man named Simeon. Simeon was a man who loved God with all of his heart. He longed for the Savior to come. God made a wonderful promise to Simeon. He wouldn't die until he had seen the promised Savior. This is why Simeon would sit and wait at the temple every day. Now, on any given day, hundreds of people would go in and out of the temple. Young, old, rich, poor, all sorts of people. But on this day, Simeon suddenly knew that something was different. As Joseph and Mary carried their newborn baby in, God told Simeon, Simeon, here's the one. Here's the one that you have been longing for. So small, so weak. But remember, sometimes small, weak-looking things are much stronger than they seem. And here's what Simeon saw in this little baby Jesus. Luke chapter 2, verse 30, starting in verse 30. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel. Although Jesus was a baby, tiny and weak, Simeon knew that Jesus was the Savior who would bring salvation to God's people. You think, how would Jesus be able to do this? Jesus was much stronger than he seemed. He was different than any other baby who had ever been born or who ever will be born. How was he different? We read in John chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So what do these verses tell us about Jesus? Well, where it says the Word, that is another name or title for Jesus. So these verses tell us something very important about this baby. I mean, remember what the angel told Mary and Joseph, that Jesus would be God's son. And even more amazing than that, Jesus is God. God is eternal and never had a beginning. Jesus is eternal too, although he did have a human birthday like any ordinary baby, but Jesus always was. Jesus created the heavens and the earth and everything else. In fact, everything that is true about God the Father is also true of Jesus. John later writes in verse 14 of John chapter 1, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. So that day, a long time ago, when Simeon took that small, frail little baby in his arms, without even fully realizing it, he was holding and seeing the greatness of God. It's almost too good to be true, but that's exactly the kind of thing that God does. He does something better than we could have ever imagined or even hoped for. Little baby Jesus will grow up and show God's people and really the whole world that he's a great and mighty Savior. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to check out the discussion questions that go along with this video that can be found on our website. And as always, we hope that you join us again next time.